This debate is, let's talk, it's purely about left atrial appendage closure. I'm going to take a very different tack than you. You showed a lot of data, a lot of slides. And data is great, but we're interventional cardiologists. We all love doing procedures. We love doing left atrial appendage closure. But let's not make this more than it really needs to be, okay? This is not some sort of underdog versus, kind of lucky loser type of story. This debate is really about the logistics. Now, Rita, I just met him today, but I know he's been doing these procedures for, longer than since I've been in cardiology probably, and I appreciate that left atrial appendage is a passion of yours, which is great. I will say that, there are different types of characters when we talk about this field in general, and this is not necessarily a good versus evil discussion, Rita, because I like you, and I know you now, and to know you is to love you, and to love you, well, but the reality is this is really not about me and you. Because, I like left atrial appendage closure, I do left atrial appendage closure, but does it need to happen in everybody with stroke? The question is it appropriate for the entire population of high risk for stroke? And that's really the question. Rita, look, I looked at your CV and your resume kind of preparing for this. I think, you're incredibly good-hearted and thoughtful in the way you think about things. You've written a lot about it, and I really do appreciate a lot of what you have to say on the topic, okay? But the question is drugs versus the appendage closure. So obviously I'm not going to go through too much data. We know that AFib is an epidemic. It's increasing. We know that their strokes can happen from AFib. They increase with your age. We have a CHADS VASC scoring system that gives you a general sense of your annual risk of stroke from atrial fibrillation. We also have different scoring systems to figure out the bleeding perspective from anticoagulation. But let's be clear. One, most of our bleeding perspectives are based on Coumadin, not on NOACs, and which is one of the main questions here today. So a lot of these risks of bleeding, when you look at the NOAC trial, seem to be a lot less. And so a lot of people justify the idea of appendage closure based on, 40% of patients aren't on Coumadin or aren't on anticoagulation. First of all, that rate seems to be decreasing since the development of NOACs. Even in this trial, if you look at some data, not in graphical form from 2014, the percentage of NOACs is heavily, heavily increasing the amount of patients who are getting anticoagulated. The lesson from the data should not be we should be closing 40% of the population. Should be teaching our physicians that people should be anticoagulated. There's too much of a bias on the idea that, you only have a little bit of AFib, or, it only comes and goes a few times a month, it's probably okay. Or, you fell once and you had a little cut there, it bled. Yeah, that's a bleeding risk, we should be careful. Not all bleeding is created equal. Let me give you this quote. The risk of stroke is vastly underestimated, while the risk of bleeding is overestimated. Time is our friend with the novel oral anticoagulants because almost all of the anticoagulant effects clears the patient's system in about 24 hours for patients with relatively preserved renal function. That's for NOACs. So reversal should not be the first step. It should be stopping the drug and waiting if it ever happens. So the bleeding perspective of NOACs is a lot less. Now this quote is from Ruff. Ruff, actually don't know Ruff very well. He could be a janitor for all I know, but I'm joking. Christian Ruff is a guy from Harvard. He's part of the NOAC trials. He's done a lot of work on the direct thrombin inhibitors and factor 10A. And so I figure he'll probably be coming to the Toronto course next year, and Eric will ask me to debate him with 24 hours notice about this topic, I'm sure, which is always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. When it looks at the outcomes of the NOAC trials, you've got a lot of benefit overall. Compared to Coumadin, we're in a different ballgame now. So we can't talk about bleeding as if in Coumadin it's terrible, rat poison, all these things. We're not talking about Coumadin, we're talking about NOACs. And in general, NOACs, the bleeding risk for major bleeds is low. And remember, even though most clot develops in the left atrial appendage, not all clot is in the left atrial appendage. Some of it's in the left atrium. Some of it's maybe forming at the atrial septum. We saw a few cases that you presented, Rita. Thank you so much. You never know where clot's going to develop. And so closing the appendage does not solve the whole problem. Would I feel comfortable for my mother with a large left atrium just having the appendage closure if she's moderate risk for bleeding? No, I'd want her on anticoagulation, personally. Yeah, you look at the data. We'll do a little bit of data. And you mentioned yourself, 4% risk of complications. Yes, it decreased as time goes on as we get technically better, but 4%, pulmonary valve replacement and it's less than 1% for major complications. Not so good. You know, you look at PREVAIL. When you look at the conclusions of PREVAIL, which was the follow-up to PROTECT AF, look at their conclusion. Although non-inferiority was not achieved for overall efficacy. What did that say? Non-inferiority, not even a superiority trial, was not achieved. Event rates were low. Okay, so you can consider it. And procedural safety has significantly improved. Definitely not saying that it's safe. When you look at the meta-analysis that was published in Circ Electrophysiology, you know, they looked at both the devices and NOACs versus Coumadin. And when you look at both NOACs and Coumadin do better in reducing stroke and reducing death. But obviously, when you look at just the devices, that favors warfarin over NOACs, which makes sense for both for bleeding complications or procedural complications. That makes you wonder a little bit. So before you go and jump to close your appendage in your mother, let's wait for this trial. This is a good trial that's going to come out. It's going to include approximately 400 patients looking at NOACs versus left atrial appendage closure. This will use the Watchman. And you know, the primary outcome will be a composite endpoint with 2-year follow-up. I think that should be interesting. So, you know, it really comes down again, finally, to conclude as far as your philosophy of life. You know, how do you feel about things? I think some people say, throw caution to the wind. Let's make this the wild, wild west again, where we just close everybody's appendage. AFib is pretty common. But I'd rather say that caution is one of the parents of security. So be thoughtful. Be cautious when you do things. You know, again, Rita, I respect you a lot. I really, it's been a pleasure to meet you during this conference. You come from a beautiful place, Montreal. I think it's a lovely, lovely town. Of course, you know, New York City, you know, let's just not even go there. I saw that you did some training in Harvard. I think, you know, obviously that gives you a lot of cachet, but go Tigers is all I have to say to that. And really, what is a Crimson anyway? Let's be honest. Don't be fooled by people that are overly autocratic, telling you you must do things. Passion is great, but I want you guys to trust yourselves in your decision making. Do what's right, always. Never do what's wrong, okay? You always want to choose the better person, the better idea. Be moral in your decisions. And so with that, my fellow Americans, my fellow Canadians, and all you other people, you know, all
that's very American.
Pediatrics alike, I wish you farewell. I wish you to choose and vote accordingly to who you really feel. And, you know, and all I say is, God bless you, and God bless to the Toronto course.